think I managed to first hear Franz Ferdinand on the radio, not the news that he was shot. But almost that, 'cause take me out. I wasn't necessarily ahead of the hype, but I sensed that hype. At a time when guitar music didn't necessarily have footing to the extent that we were praising the Strokes, hearing such a blast of insistent music turn up just sounded like the future. It was 1978, wasn't it? So, of course, it went full length and I went full length. And I don't find this album particularly convincing. It's got such an obvious dichotomy between the singles, or the ones that ought to be singles, and the ones that just have one riff and one line of lyrics on a 4x4 loop. With songwriting integrity so inconsistent, functionally this is a very good EP with some extra tracks between. I could highlight how sharp and essential the good tracks are, but even then, like, the version of This Fire on here is the slow and dodgy one. No one's gonna ignore this album, but there won't be anything on it that failed to get onto the hits compilation that's worth going back to this for. I should check the hits compilation and see if I'm correct. Am I correct? Close enough. It just doesn't fulfill an album length of how good Franz Ferdinand are, because what it's trying to do is fulfill a few singles and have some B-sides too. Then they stepped it up, and they particularly stepped it up in the regard that these songs actually have structure. They go places and they take you. Almost as catchy, just as catchy in the good ways, and even more suave. This rather quick follow-up does take it up. It does sag a little toward the end, but then it picks back up for the last three. And though it spends one song ripping off specifically Monday Morning by Pulp, that's not yours to use. Yeah, maybe it is. Pulp weren't around. Someone ought to have been Pulp. And here's an album that matches up to those of Pulp, the good ones. Then, by going a bit concept-y, they've come up with coordinated filler. Somehow in a good way. I can't pretend that this one's essential beyond the singles, but now if it's singles and B-sides, and maybe more B-sides than singles, they're at least cogent. The good tracks complete their crossover from dance rock to rock dance, and you just gotta love when someone does disco in a way that could have been ironic, but isn't, because it's just good. And the album tracks aren't reduced versions of the same, but versions of different ideas. I took ages deciding between these two, that's why I've filmed the stack separately. Tonight is clearly a more intelligible whole as an album, but I can't deny those singles of the first one, so yeah. Then an understandable move from a band who are always going to be described as a singles band to steer so far away from that they've made an album that's all album tracks, nothing worth being a single. Don't look up how many singles they released from this album. They're just not that good. It's kind of trying to explore the limits of the Franz formula, and they do that by highlighting the limits. Where you can usually expect a killer, funky riff that's just playing the same single note in a kind of rhythmic way. If you look at the cover of this 2013 album and realize it's exactly what AI would have come up with if you'd said, generate a generic art pop indie album cover from 2004, that also illustrates how well Franz's sound is lasting at this point. That album title is quite affirmative about going through the motions, and that's how they feel here. So then they did the very right thing, and this is an album I've already covered on Rank the Albums. Note that I'm holding the 16-track version. I'm gonna let my invisible self sort out how I confront this one.
Here the two bands flatter each other by writing songs in each other's styles. It's sure gonna stack up well.
I think Franz working with Sparks worked wonders for both acts. Franz have demonstrated that on their latest full-length, their riotist, even by their standards. There's a significant lineup change here, losing their guitarist from the start, replacing him, and also adding a keyboard guy who does backing vocals. And that's led to them coming up with some cool new trash. It's particularly satisfying when an album gets even better for the second half. Having some parts replaced has meant that Franz can do some new things. It's a more synth-led sound, it's darker and deeper, sinister but with a cocked eyebrow and something to say.